Hello, scholars. So today we are going to learn about learning preferences in education. These are sometimes referred to as learning styles. If you took an FYE course, and hopefully all of you have, you probably have already talked about this a little bit in that course. But learning preferences, they're just the ways that individuals like to receive and engage with information. So they reflect what feels most comfortable and natural when learning, not necessarily what works best for learning. So what I want to do is introduce you to like the 4 common learning preferences and then kind of look at the research around those and then also give you a little bit of ideas of how you can use this in the workforce, because I know not everyone in this course is going into education. So let's first look at the different types of learning preferences or learning styles. So there's 4. We're going to look at 2 on this page, but the 4 are visual, auditory, reading, writing, and kinesthetic. So let's look at visual first. When we talk about visual learning preferences, we're talking about seeing, right? So students who are visual learners or who prefer this type of learning, they prefer looking at images, charts, graphs, maps. They want to watch some videos. They want to look at diagrams. They are really into timelines sometimes. So an example would be a student understands history better with maps and visuals, like seeing pictures of the individuals that we're talking about or looking at where in the world are we talking about, those types of visual things. Auditory, that means what we hear, and those types of learners, they prefer listening to lectures, discussions, sometimes even a podcast. They probably even like listening to books on tape, explaining their ideas out loud. So an example of this would be like a student remembers content from a class discussion or lectures. The last 2 types are reading and writing, and then the kinesthetic. So let's look at reading and writing. This is like text-based. These students, they prefer reading textbooks, reading articles, writing their own notes, writing lists, writing essays. So if you ever learn, I don't know if you guys are still doing this, but like the Cornell notes where you would write down your notes, research has shown that students retain information if they hear what they're learning and then they write it down and put it in their own words. You'll notice I just gave you 2 examples of learning preferences. I gave you auditory and then I gave you this read write. That's important. Remember that for a minute. But some students just retain that information better and can keep it in their long-term memory if they write it down for themselves. So a student learns best by reading and taking notes. And then kinesthetic. This is actually doing. And I think this is probably more important for like young learners, especially like your K through, I'm going to say they're like 5th grade, when these little bodies just cannot sit still. So you tell them something and then you reinforce it by doing an activity. And there's also adults that prefer this too, don't get me wrong. Like these hands-on activities. These, they like to get up and move around. There's a lot of role play with this type of learning. There's a lot of simulations and experiments. And a student understands better by doing an activity. So you can sit and you can talk about, chemical reactions. But until you actually get that hands-on experience and you see it and you're doing the pouring and the mixing of the chemicals and then you're like, oh my goodness, like vinegar and baking soda, like it foams up and it makes this volcano, right? That is like an experiment that you can actually do something. You are participating actively, and that's really a lot of fun. And so sometimes students learn better by doing an activity that reinforces what you've already told them. So let's talk about the research on learning preferences. And I will have a list of these articles where I'll hyperlink them for you so you can read the articles if you want to. But what we know is there's an evidence-based higher education article that came out by Newton in 2017. And basically, it's this beliefs about learning preferences. Visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Those 3 are kind of the major ones. We've recently added reading and writing to it. So some of your older studies, like this one from 9 years ago, it's only going to include 3 of those learning preferences. But the key findings in this article is that many people believe individuals learn better when they receive information, excuse me, in their preferred learning style. However, another key finding was research shows little evidence supporting this claim. So what does that mean? Well, it means that it's not just one size fits all. Visual learners don't just learn by visual only. They learn by a combination of these. They see it, and then maybe they act it out. They role play it. That's more of that kinesthetic, that doing. Another article came out more recently in 2023. This is actually a study, but this is about learning style preference and then also academic achievement. And the key findings from this were people do report clear preferences, right? 90.5% of the people that were surveyed, so let's say, and you can read about this, let's say they surveyed like 100 students. Well, 90 of those said, I really prefer hands-on learning. 54% said, I really prefer auditory learning, and 34%, almost 35%, said visual. But do you notice this is more than 100 when you add that all up? So what is that saying? Yeah, I do have a preference. More people preferred kinesthetic, but then they're also like, but I need the auditory or I need the visual too. So preferences really vary widely across groups and contexts. There's also the VARK model research. This is visual, auditory, read, write, kinesthetic. This is like all of them combined, right? So the key findings in this research have found that most people learn by doing multiple things, not just one type. And people prefer multiple ways of receiving that information. I want to see it, I want to hear it, I want to read about it, and then I want to act on it. That really enforces all of those learning preferences, right? So accommodating learning preferences and teaching, this is another study that came out in 2023, and really it just gives you a breakdown of those preferences. But what they're saying in all of this research that's come out is people do have preferences for receiving information, but many of those people don't just learn one way. So it's important that research shows, not shoes, let me fix that really quickly, that research shows that matching instruction to preference does not consistently improve learning. So learning preference, it doesn't equal effectiveness. So keep this in mind. What does that mean? Well, I'm a visual learner, so I can only learn things through images. No, that's not true. But that's kind of the old way of thinking that we're kind of debunking now. So students don't necessarily learn better just because instruction matches their preference. The type of content and how it's taught, that matters more. So again, instead of thinking like this, instead of thinking, well, I'm a visual learner, think, I like visuals, but I learn best when I use multiple ways to engage with the content. So what's the research telling us? It's telling us how to put best practices for this. Use multiple modalities. Use those visuals, use your auditory, your mini lectures, your discussions, do an activity or a role play, and then also reading and taking notes. That's really important. Why? Why should we try to do a variation of all of these? Well, because it's universal design for learning. And also, we've talked a lot about equity and equality, but this is equity-focused instruction. You may have students who can't read very well. And so reading and taking notes, although that might be like preferred for like a certain topic or, content that you're covering because it's just easy, they're not going to do very well with that. You need to also make sure you have like visuals available so that they can really make that connection. You would be surprised, but we do get students in college who cannot read coming out of high school. So we want all students to be successful. And if you don't have that reading foundation, there are courses that students take to help them with their reading, but also it's like, well, I can implement some visuals in here. I can add some other things. I can do like a hands-on activity to really help you understand what was happening in history. Or we can do role play. We can act it out, right? So that you're not just reading it. So learning preferences, that's again, how people like to receive information, but effective learning comes from with engaging in multiple ways. So K through 12, I think it's easy for us to like think about how to do that. And when you move on, even beyond Phoenix College, You're going to take education courses that will teach you like how to come up with anchor charts and visual lessons and how to do hands-on activities. And it will get you thinking outside of the box and let you be more creative. But what about in the workforce? Because not all of you are going to be teaching. So how can we apply this to the workforce? So your learning styles in your workforce may, your learning preference is going to be important. So it's not about labeling yourself or others as a type of learner in the workforce. It's about understanding how you best receive information and how to adapt in different situations. So just like in education, some employees prefer watching demos, like listening to instructions, or they like practicing tasks like hands-on. So good companies, what you'll notice is they use multiple training methods. They don't rely on just one format. So here's like an employee flow chart here for you. And I know it's kind of small, but you can zoom in if you want to and look at it. But what it does is going through and like this is what a good company would do. They would offer you online training and webinars. They would give you manager coaching and mentorship. There would be some like sit down classroom learning. There would be some peer coaching, some cross training, and then some stretch assignments. I've seen this done and I've seen it done really, really well. I used to work in customer service. I worked in Hawaii at the Sheraton Kauai Resort and I was a concierge and I did like scuba diving and I would also like book like different things around the island that I lived on. And Sheraton, they made us go through this training and it was about the brand, Sheraton brand, but we had like sit down training, then we had hands-on training. Then we could do like some online stuff, some webinars so that we could have visuals. And it was just such great training. You will get this also, hopefully, you'll get really, really good training at whatever company you go into. If you don't, that should be a red flag. Like, maybe this isn't the best company to work for, but you got to get paid, right? But also, like, communication at work, your preferred learning style also depends on how you communicate with people. Sometimes like having a meeting and talking face to face, that's a great way to communicate. Other people may prefer like reading and writing, so they're going to want email. And other people may want to communicate by going into like a conference room and having visuals and let's talk this out, but let's also have visuals in the room with us. So a manager might explain something in a meeting and then follow up with a written summary. What's really important is your self-awareness, your flexibility and your communication when it comes to the workplace. So self-awareness, how do I usually learn best and take information and take like this onboarding with this company? How can I adapt information if it's presented not in my learning preference? Like if they only do like reading and writing, is there a way that I could possibly turn this into something visual for myself? And then how can I explain things in multiple ways to others? How can I be a good communicator? I don't just have to do auditory. I don't just have to do like speaking, but maybe I could be really better at writing. So those are things that are important when you go into the workplace. So think about those as you're moving through this module also. It doesn't just have to apply through K through 12. We can also apply this to work style and work preferences as well. So all of that to say, learning preferences don't define what you can learn. They just describe what feels easiest. And in the real world, successful people learn how to adapt, not just rely on one way of learning.